What's up, guys? I'm Nick Whalen from RotoWire. It is time for 5 bold predictions for Week 11 in the NFL. Number 1, the Chicago Bears fail to score an offensive touchdown for the 3rd straight week, even with the new offensive coordinator. All right, here we go. Bears-Packers. It's in the early window on Sunday. Packers coming in off a bye. Bears are as down bad gets right now. As you probably know, they have not scored an offensive touchdown in either of the last 2 games. They haven't scored since prior to the Hail Mary to end that game against Washington. Since then, they've managed a total of 363 total yards of offense over the last 2 weeks. They completely no-showed against Arizona. They completely no-showed to an even larger degree against a terrible New England team last week. Caleb Williams was sacked 9 times in that game. He's holding on to the ball. There's nobody open. The Bears finished that game 1 of 14 on third downs. They are 6 of 40 on third down over the last 3 weeks. 6 of 40. Bears ended up finishing that New England game at 3.4 yards per play. They have now accounted for 3 of the 6 lowest yards per play game of the season in the NFL. You can't overstate how bad this Bears offense has been. Things, of course, got so bad that the Bears fired their offensive coordinator this week, Shane Waldron, which actually makes me feel worse about this prediction. I mean, if you're the Packers, I think you'd rather Shane Waldron still be calling the plays. Regardless, the Bears will turn to Thomas Brown. You may know Thomas Brown as the architect of that vaunted 2023 Carolina Panthers offense. Look, making any sort of change here is probably a positive for Chicago, but the Bears have so many things to fix right now. You have receivers who aren't playing up to their level. You have a shaky offensive line. You have a quarterback who's losing confidence. Getting away from Shane Waldron, that certainly helps, but making all those changes over the course of 4 or 5 days leading up to a divisional game like this, it's a lot to ask. You're going up against this opportunistic Packers defense that generates turnovers at one of the highest rates in the NFL. They've had an extra week to prepare for this game. Green Bay is a top 10 defense in the NFL by EPA. They've done a better job generating pressure over these last few weeks after a slow start. They're not even doing a ton of blitzing. So I like Green Bay's chances to once again kind of frustrate Caleb Williams this week. They're holding opposing quarterbacks to just over 200 passing yards per game. They're one of the best third down defenses in the NFL. We talked about the Bears' third down struggles already. Green Bay, by the way, allows just a 33% conversion rate on third down. That's the 6th best mark in the NFL. The Chicago Bears obviously lose this game to the Green Bay Packers. They go touchdownless for a 3rd straight week. Next up, the LA Chargers. They do the unthinkable. They score 30 points as Justin Herbert outduels Joe Burrow this week. First and foremost, I want to extend a thank you to the NFL schedule makers for mercifully flexing Colts Jets out of the Sunday night slot in favor of this Bengals Chiefs game. So thank you for your service on that one. We appreciate it. Secondly, I think we see some points in this game. The total's sitting at 48 right now. This is not a Chargers total. It's by far their highest total of the season. They haven't even had a game close with a total of 45 yet. Now we're all the way up close to 50. So I think we see Jim Harbaugh kind of take the governor off of Justin Herbert, if you will. Try to unleash this passing game that's been very good, very efficient, but relatively low volume out of necessity so far this season. I continue to be really impressed by Justin Herbert on a weekly basis. I think he's playing about as well as any quarterback in the league right now, but he's become really underrated, just operating in this conservative offense with limited weaponry. But in a game against a Bengals team that airs it out, that goes high volume with Joe Burrow, the Chargers could struggle to dictate tempo here, not necessarily dragging Cincinnati into the mud like they do with most teams. You also have to keep in mind, this is somewhat of a kitchen sink game for the Bengals. They need to win this game to feel like they have a chance at a wild card spot in the AFC. So I think we see an aggressive Bengals offense. I think we see points on the board in Cincinnati, and I think we see the Chargers try to keep up. And I will say this, I think the Chargers are capable of doing that. The Bengals are 28th in pass defense EPA. They don't generate pressure. And here's the big thing. Cincinnati is the NFL's 4th worst defense on third downs and the 2nd worst defense in the red zone. They've given up 23 touchdowns on 32 red zone trips. I think that's advantage Justin Herbert and the LA Chargers. So there we have it, the LA Chargers. I think they go in, they score 30 points for the first time this season. Justin Herbert outduels Joe Burrow. Before we get to the rest of our predictions, please take a moment to give this video a like if you're enjoying it, and please hammer that subscribe button right there. It's on your screen. You can see it. Just unload on it. Press it as hard as you can. We really appreciate all who have subscribed to the RotoWire YouTube channel. Helps you make sure you don't miss any of our content through the rest of the season. Our 3rd bold prediction for Week 11, Nico Collins returns to the Houston Texans, puts up 100+ yards and 2 touchdowns on the Dallas Cowboys. I'll put my hand up here. I thought we were going to see Nico Collins back on the field last week for Houston. Ended up missing that game, but all signs point to Collins making his return from IR this weekend. Nico Collins completely changes this Houston offense, which has had to go run heavy. They've struggled over the last month without him. Prior to going down, Collins was far and away the wide receiver one in fantasy. He's since been eclipsed by Jamar Chase on a per-game production basis, but Chase and Collins are the only two receivers to average at least 20 PPR points per game this season. And keep in mind, Collins missed the second half of that last game he played back in week 5. Anyway, Collins is the true engine of this Houston passing game, and the Texans get an excellent bounce-back matchup this week against this just reeling Dallas Cowboys team that'll once again be rolling out Cooper Rush. They do have to go on the road. They do have to battle the sun in Dallas, which may be the best player on this Cowboys roster right now. But I don't care about that. I love the spot for Houston. Dallas did get Micah Parsons back last week. That matters. Still gave up 30-plus to the Eagles, thanks in part, of course, to 5 turnovers. But that's kind of what's going to happen when Cooper Rush is your quarterback. Either way, this is still a bottom 5 unit in the NFL in terms of defensive EPA. Dallas is particularly bad against the run, but they're not a whole lot better against the pass. 23rd in pass defense EPA. They're allowing opposing quarterbacks to complete over 67% of their passes this season. They're dead last in yards per attempt. They're 30th in yards per completion. They're not generating takeaways at nearly the same rate that they were a season ago. Just 5 interceptions on the year for Dallas through 9 games. It's also a defense that's prone to giving up big plays. 29th in average depth of target. CJ Stroud is 4th in the NFL in air yards this season. And Nico Collins is averaging nearly 18 yards per reception on the year. Prior to the injury, he'd already racked up 8 catches of at least 20 yards in just 4.5 games. All of those stats I just rattled off, they're a recipe for disaster for this Dallas defense, which of course still has to worry about Joe Mixon as well. So I think the return of Nico Collins kind of unshackles this Texans passing game. Nico Collins goes for 100-plus yards, 2 touchdowns in his return this week. Next up, we're going out to Denver. Bo Nix. I think he finishes the week as a top 5 quarterback for the second time this season. I'll be honest, Bo Nix, his ascent has been shocking to me based on how we started the year. I thought we were going down the Will Levis road. I thought we were getting 2 or 3 turnovers a week out of Bo Nix, but he's got things turned around. He's settled in. He looks more confident. He's now the QB9 on the year in terms of total fantasy points. On average, he's the QB13. Broncos, of course, have not had their bye yet. Back in week 8 against Carolina, that's when we saw Bo Nix finish as a top 5 fantasy quarterback with just under 30 fantasy points. He's been hovering closer to 17 or 18 the last 2 games, but now he gets a matchup against the Atlanta Falcons, boys. A defense that's given up 22 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks this season. And perhaps most importantly, they're struggling against mobile quarterbacks. They've given up the 3rd most QB rush yards allowed this season, and they haven't even really played a true running quarterback since early in the year. Now, Bo Nix didn't do much with his legs last week against Kansas City, finished with negative rushing yards, in fact, but he has 4 rushing touchdowns on the year. He has 5 games with at least 35 rushing yards and a couple games over 50. I think this could be one of those spots against an Atlanta defense that's down to 22nd now in EPA. They don't generate pressure whatsoever. They have only 9 sacks in 10 games on the year. That is dead last in the NFL. They're also the only team allowing opposing quarterbacks to complete at least 70% of their passes. So, look, I'm not saying the Broncos come in and put up 35 on this Atlanta team, but I think this should be a really good spot for Bo Nix, both to exploit this defense through the air and with his legs. We've got a couple of elite quarterbacks on bye this week as well, so a little bit easier perhaps for Bo Nix to find his way into the top 5. I think he does it. I think he finishes week 11 as a top 5 fantasy quarterback. All right, our 5th and final bold prediction for week 11. The Kansas City Chiefs win by at least a touchdown in Buffalo. They keep the undefeated season alive. All right, so the Chiefs are underdogs on the road in Buffalo, and perhaps rightfully so, probably rightfully so. They escaped by the skin of their teeth last week at home against the Denver Broncos, only scored 16 points in that game. Of all the teams in NFL history to start a season 9-0, there have been 32 of them. The Chiefs have the worst point differential through 9 games of any of those teams. So it's been a dominant season, but it has not felt like a dominant season whatsoever for KC. Bet against Patrick Mahomes at your own peril. We know the numbers here. Mahomes is 11-3 straight up as an underdog in his career. He's 12-1-1 against the spread as a dog. He's 25-10 straight up as either a dog or a favorite of 3 points or less. Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs thrive in these close game situations. Now, you could argue that the Bills maybe have a slight motivational edge here, trying to prove to themselves that they can beat this Chiefs team. Maybe it means more to Buffalo than it does KC. And look, the Bills have had success in the regular season against the Chiefs. Mahomes' last loss as an underdog did come against Buffalo a couple of years ago, but I also get the sense that the Chiefs kind of want a gun for the undefeated season. Why not, right? I mean, how often do you get a chance to make that kind of history, a three-peat and an undefeated season? I think they want to go for it, and this is really the game that might determine whether or not they have a legitimate chance. I think the Chiefs survived their disaster game a week ago against Denver. They come in refocused, they're prepared for this Bills team, and it's a Bills team that could be down a few key weapons. Keon Coleman already ruled out. Amari Cooper, He's in danger of missing a third straight game. Dalton Kincaid, I don't think we see him this week. Went out last week with a knee injury, hasn't practiced at all this week. I know the Chiefs haven't necessarily been firing on all cylinders. It hasn't looked as dominant as you'd think, but you still need your full complement of weapons to have success against this defense. Obviously, the Bills aren't just going to roll over here, but I think this is a reminder game by Patrick Mahomes that he is still the best quarterback and best football player in the world. The Chiefs go into Buffalo. They win by at least a touchdown. They keep the dream of an undefeated season alive. And by the way, they get the Panthers in week 12. They get the Raiders in week 13. So if KC wins this one, that undefeated talk is really going to start ramping up.